The warm glow of white fairy lights tangled through the pine branches, seeped soft gold across every surface of the Voss family living room on Christmas Eve. The air thickened with the sweet burn of a vanilla candle, spiked with the sharp fizz of sparkling cider Margaret had poured into stemmed glasses hours earlier, and the distant hum of a holiday jazz station hummed low from the soundbar Alara had bought them 2 winters prior. Every decorative throw pillow, the plush cream area rug beneath their feet, even the hand-carved wooden fireplace mantel holding framed family photos, Alara had covered every bill for all of it, year after year, without a single complaint spoken aloud. 32 years old, self-built financial consulting practice operating fully remote out of a small downtown Atlanta office she leased alone. Alara had spent 8 years quietly underwriting her parents' entire comfortable suburban lifestyle. She covered their $2,700 monthly mortgage, the 2 luxury SUV payments, every grocery run, utility bill, insurance premium, and every random splurge her 27-year-old sister Lila set her heart on. Her father Henry had opened the evening's gift exchange with a clear, definitive statement as they settled onto the sectional after dinner, voice firm and solemn like he was delivering a rule no one could break. "No extravagant gifts this year, everyone. Money's tight around here, we've all got to cut back." Alara had nodded quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She'd accepted the line without pushback for as long as she could remember, even knowing every dollar keeping their household afloat originated solely from her client invoices. She'd wrapped small, thoughtful items for each of them. A leather work notebook for Henry. A set of luxury hand creams Margaret ranted about being too pricey to buy herself. A silk hair scarf Lila had eyed at the mall months before. She'd wrapped them neatly, placed them beneath the tree beside a half-dozen other wrapped packages, and telling herself the quiet peace of the holiday mattered more than equal treatment. Lila went first, tearing through wrapping paper in messy, excited rips, her laughter bright and unfiltered as each new item emerged. The latest top-tier iPhone slid out, its box glossy and unopened, and she held it aloft, screaming, while their parents clapped and smiled like they'd just handed her the keys to a man. Next came a thick dust bag housing a leather designer tote retailing for $5,000, its branded hardware glinting under the trees, followed by a velvet jewelry box lined with tiny round diamond studs that Margaret helped fasten into Lila's ears, cooing about how her baby girl deserved all the beauty the world had to offer. The pile of gifts marked Lila's name stretched halfway across. No other packages sat beneath the tree after they'd all been. Nothing labeled free, nothing for it, and not a single wrapped box with Alara's name scrawled across the paper. She sat rigid on the edge of the tunnel, the small wrapped gifts she'd brought for them tucked forgotten beside her boots, the stinging cold of disappointment creeping up her throat before she could tamp down. The room hummed with celebration only after. No one glared away. No one acknowledged she'd joined at all. When the chatter died down long enough for her to find voice, Alara spoke soft, tentative, not angry, just confused. "Mom, what about me? You said no expensive gifts this year, but Lila got all of this. I didn't get." Silence crashed over the room in an instant. Henry's smile dropped from his face, his jaw tightening hard as he stared straight ahead into the fireplace instead of me. Lila's new phone froze half her pocket, her expression shifting from glee to a petty, pensive pout before she turned her gaze entirely. Margaret stood from her armchair in one sharp movement, crossing the carpet in 3 quick strides until she stood directly in front of Alara, her hands balled tight. "Is this really how you choose to Christmas? Acting jealous of your sister's happiness?" Margaret's voice rose sharp and shrill, each word sharp enough to cut. Before Alara could open her mouth to reply, a sharp crack echoed through the living room, her mother's palm connecting hard against the curtain. The blow knocked Alara's head sideways, heat blooming instantly on her skin, a dull throbbing settling deepness. Shock muscles rigid, she could only stare up at Margaret, unable to process that the woman who'd raised her had just struck her and the whole family, over a simple, honest question. No one then to intervene. Henry stayed seated, staring at the flames. Nothing had happened. Lila twisted her new diamond studs in her ears, pretend to witness a thing. Tears burned back of Alara's eyes, but she refused to love them. She pushed herself to her feet without a word, grabbed her wool winter coat off hook by the front door, and stepped out into the frigid Georgia December air with by. The front door shut behind her, muffling the sound of their chatter picking back up like the confrontation had never taken place at all. She slid into the driver's seat of her sedan, turning the key in the ignition and letting the heater blast warm air on her cheek. Her phone rested face on the center console, its banking app icon glowing green. She reached out, her trembling fingers hovering above the login button, and pulled up every recurring payment, every authorized credit line, every auto transfer she'd set up to sustain their comfortable, unearned lifestyle for the past 8 years. All of it traced back to her accounts, her income, her savings, her credit, all funneled direct into their endless comfort. For years, she handed it over willingly, desperate to earn a scrap of the love and attention they Lila. But in that living room, with the red mark blooming across her cheek, and the empty space beneath the Christmas should have sat. Something in her snapped clean into. The compliant, giving version of herself they'd good was gone. She stared at the screen, the list of automatic charges scrolling before her eyes, and understood the full weight of the power she held that they'd never once considered she might use. Every bill, every luxury purchase, every card linked to their names relied entirely on her financial backing. Tonight she would pull every single plug. There would be no more endless funding for a family that saw her as nothing more than a walking wallet, willing to strike her for daring to ask for basic equality. The highway stretched back to Alara's downtown condo stretched quiet and gray, under faint streetlights, December wind whipping hard against the car windows. The red welt on her cheek still pulsed with a dull, burning ache, and every time she blinked, she replayed the split-second Margaret's hand connected with her skin, the way her father and sister had looked away rather than step between them. By the time she pulled into her covered parking spot and shut off the engine, the fog of shock had lifted, replaced by a cold, unshakable clarity she hadn't felt in decades. She was done letting her income prop up their one-sided comfort at the cost of her own self-respect. She unlocked her front door, kicking off her snow-dusted boots by the entry mat and hanging her heavy wool coat over the rack. Her small, minimalist home office sat at the back of the unit, floor lamp casting soft yellow light over a walnut desk stacked with client spreadsheets and locked file folders full of tax records and bank paperwork. She dragged out her laptop, set it open on the desk, and plugged in her charger before pulling up every financial portal she controlled. Personal checking, high-yield savings, 2 separate credit lines she'd added her family as authorized users to years prior, auto-transfer schedules for their mortgage, SUV installments, utility auto-pays, even the recurring monthly charge for Lila's designer boutique layaway plan. Alara poured a glass of cold water and sipped it slow, steadying her shaking hands before she began the tedious, deliberate work of severing every financial lifeline one by one. First, she navigated to the credit account where Margaret, Henry, and Lila held secondary user status. A few quick clicks pulled up the authorized user management page. She unchecked each name, submitted the removal request, and watched a pop-up confirm their access had been revoked effective immediately. No more swiping her cards for grocery runs, salon appointments, impromptu shopping sprees, or last-minute restaurant tabs they expected her to cover. Next came the auto-transfers that had run on the first of every single month for 8 straight years. The $2,700 mortgage payment sent straight to their the 2 $725 luxury SUV installments, the bundled cable and internet package, home insurance premiums, Lila's monthly phone device payment for every new iPhone she did. Alara canceled each scheduled transfer without hesitation, deleting the saved routing numbers so they could not be reactivated with a single tap. Confirmation emails pinged her inbox one after another, stacking up in a digital trail of permanent. She tallied the total annual outflow on a blank spreadsheet as she worked, her pen scratching numbers across a lined notebook beside the mortgage, vehicles, utilities, insurance, Lila's constant retail charges, spontaneous cash transfers when one of them texted saying they were short cash, holiday shopping they'd charged her line, restaurant tabs, salon visits, gas cards she'd refilled monthly for cars. When the final sum settled at nearly $48,000 a year, Alara's breath caught. That money could have covered a 20% down payment on a modest single-family home in the Atlantis, the one she'd quietly dreamed of buying for herself for years. The dream she'd continuously pushed aside to keep her parents and sister comfortable. Guilt nipped at the edges of her resolve for a moment. She'd been raised to believe family came first, that turning away their need made her cruel. But the memory of Margaret's slap flared from her mind, paired with the sight of Lila's diamond studs and $5,000 tote stacked beside an untouched empty space meant for her own gifts, and the guilt. They had never once considered her dreams, her budget, or her feelings when they spent her money with it. They had treated her hard-earned consulting income as an endless, disposable resource, not the product of 60-hour work weeks and years of skipping vacations to build her business. Alara opened her locked metal safe tucked her desk, pulling out physical copies of every agreement, credit year addendums, and auto-transfer authorization forms she'd 5 years prior. She scanned each page into an encrypted cloud folder, labeling the archive family financial support termination for safe permitting. If they tried to claim she'd abandoned them without warning, she would have every piece of paperwork to prove she'd voluntarily funded their entire lifestyle for nearly a decade before cutting the cord. Midway through filing the digital copies, a calendar alert popped up on screen. The scheduled automatic withdrawal for Lila's designer handbag layaway was set to process at 7 a.m. morning. Alara clicked into the merchant portal and canceled the recurring charge right away, knowing the failed payment would trigger an automated collections alert to hit Lila's phone first thing when the store's system runs daily batch. Their carefully constructed bubble of unearned luxury was set to pop wide at sunrise, and there was nothing she planned to do. By 2 a.m., every single financial link between Alara's accounts and her family's lives had been activated. No authorized cards, no scheduled transfers, no recurring merchant charges, no automatic bill pays. She shut her laptop and leaned back in her desk chair, staring at the wall while the quiet hum of her apartment's AC. The weight of 8 years of constant financial obligation slid off her shoulders all at once. She had spent so long centering their comfort that she barely recognized the quiet freedom zest. Her phone buzzed once on the desk, a pre-programmed reminder notification for Lila's failed handbag payment waiting to fire hours. Alara picked up the device, turned off all non-essential notifications, and set it in the room. Tomorrow would bring anger, accusations, endless guilt trips, and desperate pleas for her to reverse every tonight. She knew they would understand her choice, not after years of taking her granted. But she had made up her mind, going back. The plug had been pulled, and their privileged routine would crumble without the steady cash flow she'd always supplied. Alara slept fitfully through the small hours, her cheek still tender enough to ache when she shifted her jaw against the pillow. She'd muted all non-work alerts overnight, but her phone began vibrating relentlessly on the kitchen counter by 7:30 a.m., the sharp, repeated buzz cutting through the quiet hum of her coffee maker. She'd braced herself for fallout, but nothing prepared her for the wall of unread texts and missed calls waiting when she finally unlocked the screen after pouring her first mug of dark roast. 27 missed calls from Margaret, 13 from Henry, and 42 frantic, capitalized text messages from Lila flooded her messaging app. The earliest notes came from Lila, sent minutes after the designer boutique processed the failed layaway charge. Panic bled through every typed line. The store had locked her tote on hold. Collections had left an automated voicemail threatening to repossess the bag entirely. Her brand new iPhone's monthly device payment had bounced too, leaving her phone plan teetering on suspension. Next came Margaret's messages, devolving fast from confused concern to biting anger, accusing Alara of sabotaging Lila's holiday joy out of petty jealousy. Henry's texts were quiet, layered with passive guilt, claiming the mortgage draft had been rejected overnight, and they would face late fees that would tank their credit score. Alara set her mug down slowly, scrolling through the messages without typing a single reply. She'd known cutting every automatic payment would land hard, but the sheer vitriol stung more than she expected. None of them acknowledged the slap on Christmas Eve. None mentioned the mountain of luxury gifts Lila had unwrapped while Alara sat empty-handed. Their only grievance was the sudden loss of unlimited access to her money, as if 8 years of covering every household expense was an obligation she had no right to walk away from. An hour later, a heavy knock boomed against her front, sharp and insistent, followed by Margaret's raised voice calling her full name through the wood. Alara peered through the peephole to see all three of them crowded on her small front porch. Margaret red-faced and clutching a crumpled stack of late payment notices. Lila's eyes glistening like she'd been crying for hours, and Henry leaning heavily against the porch wall, one hand pressed to his chest as if fighting off a wave of chest pain. She hesitated for only a second before unlocking the delt and pulling the door open just wide enough to stand in the entry, blocking their path inside. "Fix this right now, Alara. What on earth were you—" Margaret pushed past her half-open arm, stepping onto the welcome mat and waving the mortgage late notice inches from Alara's. "We've got late charges up. Lila's favorite bag is about to get taken away, and our truck payment bounced. You cut every single payment without a single up. This will. Plain." Lila sniffled behind her, twisting the diamond studs in her earlobes that Alara had indirectly funded. "I worked so hard for that, Tora. I just wanted one thing. Why do you always have to ruin everything good for me?" Her voice cracked, thin and whiny, as if she hadn't watched their mother strike Alara over a simple question less than 48 hours. Henry sighed loudly, rubbing slow circles over sternum, his tone soft and primitive, designed to pull. "Your mother's stress is bad for my kiddo. We thought you cared about this family. All we asked for was a little financial support. Nothing unreasonable. You've left us on the brink of losing our home over a silly Christmas." Alara's fingers curled tight into fists at her sides, the faint ache on her cheek flaring again as she stared all down. She'd spent hours replaying the Christmas Eve in her head, waiting for one of them to show even a flicker of remorse for Margaret, for the blatant favoritism laid out. Instead, they'd shown up on her doorstep solely to demand she reverse every financial aid, refusing to take any accountability for their own actions. "I am not reactivating a full payment, not until we talk honestly about what happened, Eve," Alara said, her voice steady despite the tight. "Dad told all of us no expenses this year. Then you two showered Lila with thousands of dollars in luxury items while I received When I asked why there was nothing for me, Mom slapped me across the face. Not one of you stepped in to stop it. Not one of you is a—" Margaret's jaw dropped, her anger spiking higher at Alara's unending stance. "You're making that into something huge over a tiny slap, a motion. You were being ungrateful and dramatic. You deserved place." "Deserved?" Alara repeated the word flatly, stunned by the complete. "I've covered every bill in that for 8 years. I've paid for your cars, your home, your groceries, every splurge Lila ever wanted. I ask for equal treatment and I get hit. And you think I deserve that?" Henry dropped the hand from his chest, dropping the gentle victim act entirely, Fresh and opening. This is exactly what we get for raising a thankful child. Fine, if you refuse to help your own blood, we'll cut you out of this family for good. Expect any calls, any holidays, any Lila beside their mother, crossing her arms tight over her chest. Yeah, if you act this selfish, we die. The three of them turned in unison, stomping down her porch steps and slamming the metal gate at the bottom of the walkway hard enough to rattle the fence posts. Alara stood alone in the open doorway, watching their SUV peel out of the apartment's parking lot. The weight of their ultimatum set cold in her bones. Losing their superficial connection hurt, but she refused to cave to their threats just to regain access to a household that only saw her as cash. She closed the door, the deadbolt shut, leaning her forehead against the cool wood for a long moment. Once the sharpness of their words faded, she turned toward the storage tucked off her hallway, a locked plastic bin of old bank records sitting untouched on the top shelf. A memory nagged at her. Something her mother had brushed off years before about a childhood savings account meant for a college tuition. One she'd never meant for. She dragged a stool over to the closet, unlocking the bin's small combination lock, and began sorting through stacks of sealed monthly bank envelopes, searching for any trace of that long-forgotten fund. If they'd hidden financial exploitation this large from her before, she needed proof before she faced them again. Whatever documents she uncovered here would shift every balance of this fight permanently. The overhead closet light cast thin, yellow streaks over stacks of crinkled bank envelopes, tax summaries, and faded college paperwork as Alara knelt on the storage closet's carpet. Dust motes swirled in the beam when she shifted the plastic bin, its combination lock clicking open after she twisted the 3-digit code she'd set years ago. Most of the records inside were familiar. Her first business loan documents, insurance policies, receipts for office furniture, but tucked at the very bottom, bound with frayed rubber bands, sat a folder labeled Youth College Savings, handwriting matching her mother's neat cursive. Her pulse ticked faster as she pulled the stack free, peeling back the rubber bands to spread monthly statements across the linoleum floor. The account had been opened when Alara was 7, a small fund her parents promised would grow untouched until she enrolled in university, reserved for tuition, textbooks, rent, any cost tied to building her future. For years, whenever Alara asked to review a statement, Margaret had brushed her off, saying the bank kept digital copies and there was no need to dig through physical papers. Alara had never pushed the subject. Back then, she'd trusted their word without question. She scanned the dates printed along each page, tracking deposits from birthday cash, holiday checks from distant relatives, small monthly contributions Henry had put in from his construction paycheck. The balance climbed slowly but steadily through high school, topping out at just over $16,000 the summer before she graduated. That was the number she'd carried in her head all through college, a safety net she'd planned to rely on to avoid heavy student loan. But the next page changed everything. 6 years prior, a single withdrawal of the full $16,000 balance had cleared the account in one lump sum. No partial deductions, no small incremental pull. Every cent vanished on the same. A notation scribbled faintly in pencil at the bottom of the statement. European trip for Lila, summer get. Alara's throat went, her fingers trembling as she flipped through follow-up papers confirming the funds were wired straight to a travel agency that specialized in luxury overseas vacations. The trip Margaret and Henry had gushed about for months then. The 2-week Paris and Amalfi Coast holiday they'd gifted Lila for her 21st birthday had been funded entirely by Ilara's locked-away college savings. No one had asked him. No one had mentioned touching the fund before. No apology after the act. No attempt to pay them. They'd simply emptied the account behind back, treating the savings meant for her education like disposable pocket change to spoil their golden child's vacation fantasy. All the guilt they'd layered on her over years. Claims that she was selfish for withholding. That she had everything handed to her while Lila was a carefully constructed lie built on stolen funds she'd spent her childhood. Ilara sank back against the wall, the stack of statements loose in her lap. She thought of the endless late nights pulling client reports to build her consultness, the cheap studio apartment she'd lived in through grad school to cut costs, the student loans she'd taken out anyway, because her supposed college safety net had already been drained without knowledge. Meanwhile, her parents had used her life savings to fund Lila's fancy overtrip, then turned around and expected Alara to keep covering it. Car payments, and every designer purchase Lila craved afterward. The betrayal ran deeper than the slap on his eve, deeper than the one-sided gift exchange under the tree. It was a deliberate, years-long pattern of siphoning every resource tied to her name for Lila's benefit alone. She stood, brushing dust off her jeans, and carried the folder back to her home. She got her scanner, feeding each statement page through the machine one by one, saving high-resolution digital copies to her encrypted cloud drive, cross-referencing the withdrawal date with old social media photos Lila had posted from the European trip to confirm the timeline lined up perfectly. She created a separate labeled file for the savings, attaching a brief typed note detailing every piece of evidence to keep everything organized for the inevitable next confrontation. A soft knock sounded at her front door as she finished uploading the final scan. Alara knew it was Clara, her closest friend and licensed therapist, who'd texted earlier saying she'd swing by with coffee and pastries after her morning client sessions. She tucked the physical statements into her locked desk drawer before locking the door, greeting her with a tired, hollow smile as her friend stepped inside carrying 2 paper coffee cups and a paper bag of blueberry muffins. Clara's gaze flicked immediately to the faint faded mark still visible on Lara's left cheek before landing on the half-open scanner on the desk. She set drinks down gently, pulling out a kitchen chair beside Alara, her soft and steady. No rushed judgment. "You look like you found something worse than you went this morning. What's weighing on you?" Alara pulled the locked drawer open, sliding the stack of saving statements in them. Clara picked up the top page, her eyes widening as she traced the $16,000 withdrawal line and the handwritten note referencing Lila. She read through 3 more pages in silence before setting down slowly, her expression sharp. "This isn't casual overspending or accidental overdose," Clara said. "It's on the desk. This is premeditated financial theft from a minor's long-term savings account, hidden for 6 years. Every fight with you about money, every guilt reporting Lila, every claim they can't afford based on your checks. All of it was they buried. This changes every single fight you're in with them." Alara stared at the bank clerk spread between them, the weight of 6 years of hidden exploitation settling heavy over her shoulders. She'd thought cutting the automatic payment the hardest step, but now she realized the surface conflict over Christmas gifts and unpaid bills was only a small piece of a far larger betrayal. The evidence in front of her gave her tangible proof of how little cared about her future, and she knew she couldn't hold this information back the next time they demanded she reset their financial lifeline. Somewhere outside, a car engine rumbled past her apartment windows, and Alara knew it was only a matter of time before her family returned, angrier than before. This time she wouldn't only confront them over the slackable holiday gifts. She would lay every stolen dollar from her childhood out for them to face, and force them to acknowledge the full scope of how they'd used her for their own comfort all these years. 3 days after uncovering the drained savings account, Alara tried to fall back into the steady work routine she'd built over 8 years, desperate for normalcy amid the chaos brewing with her family. Her downtown Atlanta consulting office was bright and modern, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking tree-lined city streets, glass partition walls that kept the space professional but left nowhere to hide from prying eyes. She'd scheduled back-to-back client strategy sessions all morning, walking through quarterly budget restructurings for small business owners, grounding herself in spreadsheets and revenue forecasts that made sense. Clean, fair transactional work with no hidden betrayal, no unspoken obligation. For a few hours, she almost managed to forget the endless stream of angry texts and silent, guilt-tripping voicemails waiting untouched on her phone. It was just past 1 in the afternoon, mid-break between client meetings, when the glass entrance door of her office lobby slammed open so hard the metal frame rattled. Alara's head shot up from her desk, pen freezing mid-note, as she watched Lila storm inside, cheeks flushed bright red, eyes blazing with unbridled fury. She'd ditched her part-time retail uniform for a tight sweater and jeans, the expensive diamond studs still glinting in her ear, stolen wealth she still refused to appreciate, while her brand-new iPhone, now sporting a late payment notification banner across the lock screen, was clutched tight in her trembling hand. Lila didn't bother stopping at the front reception desk or waiting for permission to approach. She marched straight past the empty waiting chair, shoved Alara's partially open office door all the way, and raised her voice loud enough to echo through the open office floor plan, drawing every co-worker's gaze toward the glass wall. "You need to fix this right now." "Oh, this is insane." Lila's tone was sharp, frantic, utterly self-absorbed, no trace of gratitude or remorse in her words. "My phone company's about to cut my service. The boutique is sending my tote back to Envy, and Mom and Dad are getting non-stop late fee notices on every single. You're ruining our lives over." Alara set her pen down, her posture calm and unyielding despite the rising tension in the room. She'd already prepared for this confrontation, had rehearsed every boundary in her head after finding those 6-year-old banks. "It's not nothing. For 8 years I paid for every single part of your lifestyle. Your phones, your bags, your vacations, every luxury you never worked a full-time job to. And 6 years ago, my entire college savings got drained to pay for your European trip. You've lived off my hard work your entire adult life, and you still can't see a single thing wrong." Lila's face twisted into a defensive, petulant scowl, her hands flying up in frustration. "It's money. What's your problem? You make so much it doesn't even to you. You have a fancy office, and car, you don't need every single dollar. I deserve nice too, and you're just jealous because Mom and Dad." The words hung in the air, unapologetic and brutally honest in their entitlement. Alara stared at her sister, finally seeing the full truth of how her family had warped Lila. Lila had never viewed Alara's income as earned. To her, every dollar Alara made was collective property, reserved first and foremost for her common pleasure, while Alara's dreams, savings, and security were all. Before Alara respond, another pair of hurried footsteps clicked across the lobby tile. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her hair disheveled, rimmed, abandoning anger entirely to slip into a desperate performance. She passed Lila, stepping into the center of Alara's office like a victim, her voice dropping to a shaky whisper designed to pull sympathy from. Baby, please. I know you're hurt about Christmas. I shouldn't have slapped you. That was my mistake. I was stressed, overwhelmed. But don't punish your whole family for one stupid moment. Your dad's terrified of losing our house. We don't have savings like you do. We can't survive without your help. Alara's jaw tightened, hollow apology. There was no sincere other's tone. No acknowledgement of the favoritism. No regret for stealing village savings. No recognition of the end. It was a temporary, surface-level sorry, crafted solely to make her reverse the financial cuts and restore their style. Punishing you, Alara said firmly, her voice steady enough to carry across the quiet office. I'm stopping the free, unlimited funding that let you all live far beyond your means while I sacrificed my own future. I paid your mortgage for 8 years. I covered your car payment, your utilities, every one of Lila's splurges. I lost my entire college safety net so Lila could take a luxury vacation I never got to afford for myself. Margaret's tears faltered, her mask slipping for a split second to reveal the familiar resentment she always held for Alara's independence. So what, you're successful. Why can't you help your own family? Blood is supposed to be everything. You're being selfish. Being selfish is draining my child savings behind my back, Alara shot back, her tone sharp but controlled. It's giving one daughter thousands in luxury gifts, the other with nothing. It's slapping me for asking for basic fairness. It's spending a decade living off my income and still resenting me for myself. Lila huffed loudly, crossing her arms. That was the best time of my life. You can't even be happy for me. Seeing me happy. Alara shook her head, exhausted by their complete lack of self-awareness. She'd come ready to negotiate reasonable support, but their refusal to take any accountability erased every last bit of plan to offer. She leaned forward, resting her forearms on her desk, and laid out her final, non-negotiable boundaries in clear and wavering terms. Here are the new rules, starting today. No more mortgage payments, no more car notes, no more luxury purchases, no more phone bills, no more vacation funding. I will never again cover any lifestyle expenses for any of you. The only exception is emergency medical costs. Verified, document, urgent medical bills only. No receipts, no proof, no payment. All gift giving is permanently suspended until every one of you sincerely apologizes for the favoritism, the slap, and stealing my savings. And I mean a real apology, not an excuse to get my money back. Margaret's eyes widened in shock and fury. You're going to let us lose our home? Let Lila's credit get ruined? You're letting that happen by refusing to take responsibility for your own, Alara corrected. I'm no longer responsible for your endless entitlement. Humiliation flashed across Lila's face as she realized every coworker within earshot had witnessed their public meltdown and unearned demands. She throwing her hands up in defeat. Fine, keep your stupid me. Don't need you anyway. With that, mother and daughter stormed out of the office, the glass door slamming behind them once again, leaving a silence in their wake. Alara's coworkers quickly returned to their tasks, but she could feel apathy lingering in the air. She sank back into her desk chair, exhaling a long, shaky breath, her hand tense from the confrontation. Her vibrated on her desk seconds later, lighting up a notification from Henry. She hesitated before pressing play, bracing herself for the final piece of her family's manipulation playbook. His voice was low, gravelly, and deliberately fragile, passive-aggressive guilt. Alara, the mortgage company sent an official late notice today. If we don't pay within 10 days, they start foreclosure proceedings. This house is our whole life. I don't know what we'll do if we lose it. I never thought it would push us to homelessness. The voice went off with a quiet, defeated sigh, and Alara screamed, her heart tightening. Mother had never once begged for accountability, never apologized for lying about no holiday gifts, acknowledged the stolen savings. Instead, was framing her boundary setting as cruelty, weaponized the threat of foreclosure to force her submission. The final family home was no longer optional. It was inevitable, and this time, Alara was ready hidden truth bare for good. The 10-day foreclosure deadline hung over Alara like a heavy, unshakable weight for the next week. She slept poorly, her nights split between replaying her father's guilt-ridden voicemail and staring at the scanned savings account statements saved in her cloud drive. Every line item a quiet reminder of the years of deception she'd endured. She refused to cave to the endless stream of pleas and threats flooding her phone, but the thought of her family losing their home, even after everything they'd done, pricked at the last threads of her long-ingrained guilt. She knew the final confrontation could no longer be delayed. She would go back to the childhood house one last time, not to beg for peace, not to compromise her boundaries, but to lay every secret, every lie, and every unfair choice out in the open once and for all. She arrived at the Voss family home on a gray, overcast afternoon, the winter Georgia sky muted and dull, matching the cold tension coiling in her chest. The suburban neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. Neat lawns, trimmed hedges, quiet sidewalk. But the house that had once felt like home now felt like a stage built entirely for her family's manipulation. Through the front window she could see movement in the kitchen. Margaret bustling around the counter. Lila slouched in a dining chair scrolling her crippled phone. And Henry sitting stiffly at the table, his posture rigid with waiting anger. Alara grabbed the folded printouts of the 6-year-old bank statements from her passenger seat, tucked them into her jacket pocket, and walked up the driveway with slow, deliberate steps. She did not knock. She pushed the front door open, the familiar click of the lock echoing through the silent living room, and walked straight back to the kitchen where her family had gathered. All 3 pairs of eyes snapping to her the second she crossed the threshold. The air smelled of burnt coffee and unwashed dishes, a far cry from the perfect, polished holiday home they'd curated for Christmas. The glamour was gone, stripped away without Alara's money to sustain it, leaving only the bitter reality of their lives. "You finally decided to show up," Margaret snapped immediately, abandoning all pretense of the tearful vulnerability she'd used at the office. Her hands rested tight on the kitchen counter, her jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. "We've been waiting for you to come to your... The foreclosure notice is taped to the fridge. 10 more days, Lara. 10 days until we're homeless and it's all..." Lila looked up from her phone, her expression sullen and resentful. Her once pristine designer tote sat crumpled on the corner counter, stripped of its brand shine, the boutique's repossession sticker visible on its left. Her phone screen still glowed with payment failures, and her diamond studs glinted dimly under the kits, a hollow reminder of the unearned luxury she lost. "Just pay the bill already. Why do you have to make us suffer like this?" Henry leaned forward across dining table, his voice sharp. No more fake heart trouble or past victimhood. The gentle father act was fully dropped, replaced by unfiltered frustration. "We raised you. We clothed you, fed you, gave you a roof your whole childhood. Now you turn around and destroy us financially the second you get a little success. That's ungrateful. Cruel." Alara said nothing for a long moment, letting their accusation hang in the air. She pulled a dining chair and sat down slowly, her movements unrushed, the stack of printed bank statements hidden. She met each of their eye one, no longer intimidated by their anger, no longer guilty for proof. "You want to talk about ungrateful?" he said quietly, her voice steady enough to cut through their outrage. "Let's talk about the $16,000 in my childhood college savings you drained 6 years ago to pay for Lila's urine. Let's talk about hid it from me. Let me take out student loans. Let me work 80-hour weeks to build mess from nothing. All while you spent my future on..." She slid the printed statements across a wooden table, the pages between them. Every withdrawal date, every handwritten note, every bank verification line visible for them to see. The room went dead in an instant. Margaret blanched white, her confident angling into panic. Lila's eyes widened in shock, caught off guard by the concrete proof of their secret. Henry's jaw tightened so hard his jawline flexed, no longer deny the truth. For a long beat, no one spoke. The only sounds in the kitchen were the distant hum of the refrigerator and the quiet rush of wind outside the windows. Alara stared at the evidence, letting the weight of their long-buried betrayal sink in. Finally, Margaret huffed a defensive breath, reaching out to shove the papers away like they were burning her skin. "That was family money. It didn't belong only to you. Lila deserved that trip. She's the sensitive one, the child who needs nurturing and joy. You've always been tough, always capable of taking care of yourself. I think you'd miss it." The words landed like a punch, raw and unfiltered, laying bare the core of their favoritism they spent decades hiding. Alara's throat tightened, not look away. "Didn't think I'd miss my future? You didn't think I'd miss the safety net you promised me, kid? You didn't care. You just saw me as a long, reliable one, the one who could sacrifice so Lila never had to struggle life." "That's not favoritism," Henry growled forward aggressively. "That's parenting different kids differently. Lila's always been softer, less equipped to handle the world. You built your own business, you make great money, you have stability. She works a part-time retail job and struggles to pay for basic things. Of course we help her more." "Help her more by stealing from me?" Alara retorted, her voice with quiet, earned fury. "You help her more by letting me fund your entire lifestyle for 8 years while she splurges on luxury about being unaffordable? You help her more than you ever loved me. That's the truth brave enough to say out loud." Lila's listened with frustrated tears, not of remorse, but of inconvenience. "I didn't ask you to take out loans. I didn't ask you to work extra hours. You chose that life for yourself. I just wanted a nice vacation and nice things. My fault you're bitter all the time. You ever wanted on my dime," Ilara replied flatly. "Every nice thing, every vacation, new phone, every designer bag. And when I asked for one single equal moment on Christmas Eve, I got slapped. When I stopped funding your endless greed, I got called selfish and cruel. I've given me every single thing I have to give, and once given me anything. Not an apology, not respect, not basic fairness. Margaret's temper flared again, panic morphing back to rage as she realized her manipulation no longer worked. So what are you going to do? Let us lose this house? Ruin our credit? Leave us destitute just to point? I'm not proving a point, Alara said firmly, down her final unbreakable terms. I'm stopping my own abuse. I will not pay your mortgage. I will not pay your car payments. I will not give Lila's luxury lifestyle ever again. The only support I will ever offer moving forward is emergency medical care. Verified, documented, life-only expenses. No more Lyle handouts. No more free rides. Seeing my future for your hurt. That's nothing, Henry bit out, furious. You're abandoning us. I'm stopping my end of myself, Alara corrected. I abandoned my dreams, my savings, my peace, my 8 years to take care of all of you. Now it's your turn to take care of yourselves. She stood from the table, leaving the stack of bank statements spread across the dining surface for them to sit with, no longer needing to defend or explain her choices. She did not wait for their shouted rebuttals, didn't linger for more guilt trips or apologies. She walked to the living room, unlocked the front door, and stepped outside into the cool, closing the door firmly behind her. As she climbed to her car and glanced back toward the house, she saw movement through the kitchen window. Lila was already yanking her designer wardrobe out of her bedroom closet, folding her expensive bags and clothes into duffel bags, finally facing the reality that her free, privileged life was over. Her parents stood frozen at the kitchen table, staring at the foreclosure notice taped beside their fridge magnets, the weight of entitlement finally crashing down on them. Alara turned the key in the ignition, the car engine to life. For the first time in her adult life, she did not feel guilty for saving herself. The old life of endless and one-sided loyalty was gone for good, but the aftermath of her choice was only to reshape every one of their lives forever. 30 days after that explosive kitchen showdown, the harsh winter gray finally lifted over Atlanta, soft sunlight filtering through Alara's condo windows each morning, casting warm streaks across her quiet, uncluttered space. The constant storm of calls, texts, and desperate confrontations that had consumed her holiday season had faded into a fragile, still silence. For the first time in 8 years, Alara woke up each day without a lingering knot of anxiety in her chest, without silently calculating which family bill was due, without bracing herself for another round of guilt trips or unspoken demands. The endless weight she'd carried for so long was finally gone, replaced by a calm, steady freedom she'd almost forgotten existed. Life for the Voss family had reshaped completely in the weeks following her final boundary declaration. Every privileged routine they'd taken for granted, crumbling into quiet, ordinary reality. Alara never received a single sincere apology from her parents or sister. No admission of favoritism. No remorse for the stolen college savings. No regret for the Christmas Eve slap that had broken everything open. Instead, they'd been forced to face the natural consequences of their years of entitlement, with no safety net of Alara's income to cushion their mistake. Henry and Margaret had narrowly avoided foreclosure on their suburban home, but only through drastic, humbling changes they'd never imagined making. They'd sold their luxury SUV for a reliable, high-mileage sedan, cut every non-essential subscription and luxury service, and refinanced their mortgage into a smaller, tighter monthly payment that fit their actual retirement income. The home was no longer filled with expensive decor and fancy appliances Alara had. They'd stripped back to basics, learning to live within their own means for the first time in decades. Their credit scores had dropped from the late bill penalties, a permanent mark from the years they'd relied on someone else to carry their responsibilities, and they no longer made passive-aggressive comments about wealth or unmet expectations. Lila's world had shifted even more dramatically. The boutique had fully repossessed her $5,000 coat, and her cell phone plan had been temporarily suspended for non-payment before she finally took accountability for her life. She'd quit her lazy part-time retail shift and picked up a full-time server job at a local diner, working long, tiring weekend and evening hours to cover her own phone bills, rent, and small daily expenses. She'd downsized from her spacious childhood bedroom to a tiny studio apartment closer to her place, forced to pack away most of her designer wardrobe and sell a handful of her most expensive unused pieces to cover her security deposit. The diamond stud still sat in a jewelry box on her dresser, a quiet reminder of the unearned luxury she could no longer access. But she no longer texted Alara begging for handouts or threw tantrums over missed material. Alara watched these changes from a distance, no longer emotionally invested in fixing their mistakes or saving them from her choices. She'd established a strict, intentional new routine for contact. Short, scheduled phone call every day evening. No impromptu visits, no late-night crisis texts, no unscheduled demands for mere favors. The calls were calm, office level, emotional. Quick chats about weather, minor updates, routine health checks, devoid of the manipulation, guilt, and anger that had defined their relationship for her entire adulthood. She upheld her single rule of support. 2. When Margaret came down with a mild respiratory infection, requiring urgent prescription medication doctor's visit. Alara covered the verified medical bill without hesitation, no strings attached, no lectures given. She honored her boundary of compassionate care, but never slipped back into 1 mile evening. Clara joined Alara's private balcony, the city lights of downtown Atlanta twinkling in the distance. A bottle of crisp white wine and 2 glasses resting between them, a small metal table. The faint, faded mark on Alara's cheek fully vanished now. No physical trace left of this eve betrayal. Just like the emotional scars were finally beginning and heal. "You know what surprises me most," Clara said softly, leaning against the balcony railing, her gaze drifting eyeline. "You didn't burn the bridge completely. You didn't cut them off out of anger. You rebuilt the bone terms." Alara smiled faintly, swirling the wine in her glass, her tone quiet and sure. "I used to think love meant sacrificing every part of them comfortable. I thought family meant taking every accusation, every unfair choice, every silence. Boundaries meant cruelty, but I've realized now, love does disappear." In the weeks of peace, the final confrontation, Alara had refocused all the time, energy, and money she'd once poured into her family's endless comfort back into her own future. She'd restarted a payment savings plan, depositing every dollar she no longer spent on their luxury bills into a dedicated home fund, watching her personal savings grow steady for the first time in her life. She'd treated herself to small, long-overdue joys, weekend day trips, new office equipment she'd delayed buying for years, quiet nights prioritizing her own rest instead of stressing for someone else's unpaid bills. She'd stopped defining her by how much she could give others, and started defining how she could treat herself. She still kept the scanned payments in her encrypted cloud, not to hold or reopen old fights, but as a gentle reminder of how far she'd come. Those documents were no longer betrayal to fuel anger. They were proof she'd learned the hard way. Her wishes, her future, and her dignity were never meant to be spent keeping other people's battlement afloat. There was no dramatic, tearful reconciliation, no grand family apology, no fairy tale healing of their broken dynamic. Henry and Margaret still subtly favored Lila in small, quiet ways, still failed to fully of harm they'd caused. Lila carried traces of her entitlement, still struggled with the ordinary work. None of it mattered to Alara anymore. She no longer craved their validation, no longer begged for their fairness, no longer sought conditional love. As the sun dipped fully below the skyline, and the fur began to glow above the city, Alara thought back to that brutal Christmas Eve, to the empty space tree where her gifts should have been, to the sharp sting of her mother's slap, to the crushing loneliness of realizing she'd spent her entire adult life loving a family that what she could give them. The empty wrapping paper from that night still sat, folded neatly in a storage box at the back of her closet, a quiet relic of her old life. But the hollow, aching feeling it once left in her chest was gone. She had traded endless, one-sided sacrifice for quiet, steady self-respect. She had lost the fake, unbalanced dynamic she'd clung to for years, but found herself. For the first time in her life, Alara Voss was not any wallet, not anyone's caretaker, not anyone's backup plan. She was just her own, fine apologetically and peacefully free.